The scrubs had gone from pale blue to gray somewhere around hour 11, and Naomi Reeves did not have the energy left to care. She leaned against the brick wall outside Karate's, the fine dining restaurant on the corner of a street she could not afford to eat on, and let her head fall back against the cold stone. Her shoes were still squeaking faintly from the antiseptic floor of the emergency department. Her badge, clipped crooked to her chest pocket, read Reeves, RN in letters that had started peeling at the corners months ago. She had not eaten since noon. She had not sat down since 2. The valet line at Karate's moved in a slow parade of black cars, each one polished enough to throw the streetlights back twice as bright. Men in dark coats stepped out first and scanned the sidewalk before anyone else emerged, and Naomi watched them the way she watched cardiac monitors, out of habit rather than interest, cataloging rhythm without expecting anything to happen. She had walked 6 blocks from the hospital because the bus she needed had come and gone 20 minutes early, which was its own kind of cruelty after a 13-hour shift. She had planned to sit for exactly 4 minutes before finishing the walk home. For minutes to let her knees stop shaking. She did not notice the car that had stopped at the curb until the sound of the door closing reached her, a heavy, deliberate sound, nothing like the tinny slam of a taxi. A man crossed the sidewalk toward her, unhurried, and the 2 men flanking him fell back a pace, close enough to matter and far enough to give him room. He wore black wool that fit him the way water fits a glass, no gap between the fabric and the shape of him, and his shirt was the color of ash beneath an open collar. There was ink at his wrist, dark lines disappearing under his cuff, and his hair was combed back from a face that gave away nothing at all. He stopped 2 feet from her, not close enough to crowd her, and looked at her the way he might look at a locked door he intended to open eventually. "You have been standing here for 6 minutes," he said. His voice was low, even, unbothered by the cold. "Long enough that my men noticed before I did." "I'm allowed to stand on a sidewalk," Naomi said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt, mostly because 13 hours of tree-up had trained the exhaustion out of her tone and left only the flat competence underneath.
"You are," he agreed. "You are also swaying."
"I have watched men fall asleep standing up in worse conditions than this, in places that would not let them lie down. You have the same look." "I'm a nurse," she said, because it was easier than explaining the 12-hour shift that had become 13 because a trauma came in at change of shift and nobody else could take it. "I just finished a shift."
"I'm fine."
"You are not fine," he said, without unkindness, the way a man states a fact about the weather. "You are standing outside a restaurant you cannot afford, in shoes you have been on your feet in since before the sun went down, and you have not noticed that the men behind me have already checked both ends of this street twice." Naomi straightened off the wall despite the ache in her lower back, some old instinct refusing to be observed from a position of weakness. Who checks a street twice for a woman leaning against a wall? "People who check streets for a living," he said. "My name is Run Kimura. You are standing outside my restaurant." The name landed with a weight she recognized even though she could not place its source, the way certain words carry danger inside them before context arrives. She had heard it once, maybe twice, from a paramedic who had brought in a gunshot wound 8 months ago and refused to give a name, refused to let anyone call the police, and had vanished from a hospital against medical advice with 2 men in dark coats on either side of the gurney. Kimura's men, she understood now, though she had not understood it then. "I didn't know it was your restaurant," she said. "I was just resting." "I know," he said. "That is the only reason I am still standing here talking to you instead of asking my men to move you along." A car door opened somewhere down the block, and one of the men behind Kimura turned his head a fraction, some current passing between them that Naomi could not read, but could feel, the way she could feel a code about to happen in a hospital room 30 seconds before the monitor confirmed it. Kimura did not turn. He kept his eyes on Naomi, and something in his posture shifted, weight settling lower, shoulders squaring in a way that had nothing to do with the conversation they were having. "Get up," he said, quiet and fast.
"Now."
"Excuse me?" "Now," he said again, and this time he moved, one hand closing around her upper arm, not rough, but absolute, the grip of a man who had decided something and would not be argued out of it. He pulled her off the wall and turned his body between her and the street just as the first shot cracked through the night air, close enough that she felt the sound in her teeth. Everything after that happened in fragments. The valet stand exploding into splinters. A second man in a dark coat shoving a woman in an evening gown through the restaurant's front doors. Kimura's hand still on her arm, pulling her low and fast around the side of the building, into an alley that smelled of rain and old brick, away from the street and the muzzle flashes that lit the corner in short, ugly bursts. She heard shouting in a language she did not know and shouting in English that she understood perfectly, a voice yelling for someone named Ren to show himself, and she understood in the space of one breath that the man crouched over her, using his own body as a wall between her and the street, was the reason bullets were being fired outside a five-star restaurant on a Tuesday night. "Stay down," he said, low against her ear, and she felt more than heard the calm underneath the command, a stillness that should not have been possible with gunfire 20 feet away. His hand was flat against the wall beside her head, boxing her into the narrow space between the dumpster and the brick, his shoulder angled to take whatever came before it reached her. Naomi had spent 13 hours pulling glass out of a teenager's leg after a car accident and had not felt her pulse rise the way it rose now, crouched in an alley beside a stranger who had just placed his own body between her and a bullet without asking permission or expecting thanks. The gunfire stopped as quickly as it started, swallowed by the sound of tires screeching and an engine tearing away down the block. One of Kimura's men appeared at the mouth of the alley, breathing hard, a dark stain spreading across a sleeve that he did not seem to notice yet.
"They are gone," the man said.
"2 of ours are down. Not fatal. The girl from the front is she. She is fine, Hiro says." "Get everyone inside," Kimura said, straightening, and only then did Naomi realize how close they had been standing, close enough that she could count the individual threads of a shirt collar, close enough that the cologne he wore, cedar with something darker underneath, smoke maybe, was the only thing keeping her from smelling the blood on the sidewalk. He looked down at her, at the scrub top with a coffee stain from 6 hours ago, at the shaking in her hands that she could not fully stop, and something crossed his expression that was not quite an apology and not quite a question. "You are not hurt." "No," she said. "You are." He glanced down at his own forearm, where a line of red had opened along the fabric, a graze he had not registered because his attention had been entirely on her. "It is nothing." "It's not nothing, it's a laceration and you're bleeding through your sleeve," she said, the nurse in her surfacing on pure reflex even through the adrenaline. "You need that looked at." "I have people for that," he said, and something in the way he said it, flat, final, closed the subject entirely. He straightened his cuff over the wound with the same unbothered precision he had used to cross the sidewalk toward her 10 minutes earlier, as though nothing at all had happened. "You cannot walk home from here tonight." "I walk home every night." "Not tonight," he said. "Someone just tried to kill me outside my own restaurant, and you were standing close enough to be collateral. Until I know why, you're not walking anywhere alone." Naomi opened her mouth to argue, and found that the argument had nowhere to go. Her legs were still unsteady from adrenaline, her ears still ringing faintly from the gunfire, and the street beyond the alley mouth was full of flashing lights and men in dark coats she did not know and did not trust. "I don't even know you," she said, which was true and also, she realized as she said it, no longer entirely accurate. "You know enough," Kimura said. "You know I put myself between you and a bullet I did not have to explain myself for. That is more than most people learn about a stranger in a lifetime." That was the moment everything changed, though Naomi would not understand the full shape of it until much later, lying awake in an apartment 3 neighborhoods from her own, listening to a man she barely knew give quiet instructions to guards through a closed door, understanding that whatever life she had walked into that evening, there was no walking back out of it the same way she had walked in. The car that took them was black inside and out, the windows tinted dark enough that the city outside blurred into smears of light. Naomi sat with her hands folded in her lap, watching Kimura across from her as he examined his own forearm with clinical detachment, peeling back the torn fabric to look at the wound without flinching. "You should let someone stitch that properly," she said. "I will," he said, in a tone that suggested he would not, at least not tonight, and Naomi decided this was not a hill worth dying on, not after the hill she had already survived outside the restaurant. "Why did they come after you tonight?" she asked, because the question had been building in her chest since the first shot, and because she had learned in the emergency department that people rarely volunteered the truth unless you asked directly. Because there is a man named Sato who believes my territory should belong to him, Kimura said, and because he has decided that killing me in public, where everyone will see, sends a message that killing me quietly would not. And now I'm involved in that. You are involved because you were standing where you should not have been standing, he said. That is my fault, not yours. I should have told my men to clear the sidewalk instead of stopping to talk to you. Why did you stop? He was quiet for a moment, long enough that Naomi thought he might not answer at all. Outside, the city slid past in streaks of red and white light. Because you looked like someone who had spent all night keeping other people alive and had nothing left over for yourself, he said finally. I recognized it. I do the same thing, in a different way. Naomi did not have a response for that, so she said nothing, and the silence between them settled into something that was not empty, something that carried weight the way a held breath carries weight, and she found herself watching the shape of his hands in his lap, still and controlled even now, hours after gunfire, and wondering what it would take to make those hands anything other than perfectly composed. The apartment he took her to was not his, he told her, but a place his organization kept for exactly this kind of circumstance, safe and untraceable, and stocked with everything a person might need for a night they had not planned on spending away from home. 2 guards took up positions outside the door. Kimura did not stay, not that first night, only walked her to the threshold and told her someone would be outside if she needed anything, and left before she could decide whether she wanted to ask him to stay or ask him to leave her alone entirely. She did not sleep well. She kept replaying the moment his hand had closed around her arm, the exact pressure of it, decisive without being cruel, and the way his body had angled itself between her and the gunfire without a single second of hesitation, as though protecting a stranger was simply the only acceptable option available to him. The following morning, a woman named Yuki arrived at the apartment door with a change of clothes that fit Naomi almost exactly, and informed her, without much room for discussion, that Mr. Kimura would like to see her before she returned to the hospital for her next shift. Naomi found him in a study 3 floors up in a building with no sign on the door, seated behind a desk with paperwork spread in front of him that he closed the moment she entered, as though her presence took priority over whatever business had occupied him seconds before. You look rested, he said, which was a generous assessment of 4 hours of restless sleep, but Naomi did not correct him. I need to get to work, she said. I have a shift at 3. I know, he said. I had someone confirm your schedule. That's a little invasive. It is necessary, he said, until I know who ordered the attack last night, and whether they know your face. He rose from the desk and crossed the room to where she stood, close enough that she had to tilt her head slightly to hold his gaze. You will have someone with you until this is resolved. Not in the room with you. Not visible to your patients or your coworkers. But present. I don't need a bodyguard to go check blood pressure and change dressings. You do if the man who shot at me last night decides that hurting you is the fastest way to hurt me, he said, and something in his voice, some current of restraint working to stay level, told her this was not a threat he was inventing for effect. Why would hurting me hurt you? She asked, and immediately regretted the question, because the pause before his answer told her more than any words could have. I do not know yet, he said. I only know that I put myself in front of you last night without thinking about it first, and men like Sato notice things like that faster than I notice them myself. Naomi held his gaze a beat longer than she meant to, and something passed between them, unnamed and uncomfortable and entirely too warm for a conversation about assassination attempts. She looked away first. I have to go to work, she said again, quieter this time. Then go, he said. Mari will drive you. She is one of mine. You can trust her with your life, which, given the circumstances, you may need to. The following 2 weeks unfolded in a rhythm Naomi had not chosen and could not quite bring herself to resent. A car took her to work and brought her home. A woman named Mari, quiet and watchful, waited in the hospital parking lot through Naomi's entire shift, reading paperback novels with the patience of someone who had done this exact job many times before. Rin Kimura did not appear at the hospital, did not intrude on her work, but he called most evenings, Brief conversations that started as updates on the investigation into Sato's men and slowly, without either of them quite acknowledging the shift, became something closer to actual conversation. "You did not eat today," he said 3 nights in, no greeting, straight into the accusation. "How would you know that?" "Mari mentioned it. You had 4 hours between your last 2 patients and did not leave the floor once. There was a car accident. 3 patients came in at the same time. I didn't exactly have a lunch break available." "You never do," he said, and there was something in his tone that was not quite anger and not quite concern but sat somewhere in the overlap between them. "You give everything to people who will never know your name and nothing to yourself. That's the job." "It does not have to be," he said, and then, as though catching himself saying something he had not intended to say, added, "Eat something tonight. Mari has food in the car." Naomi found herself smiling at her phone after he hung up, an expression she did not examine too closely, and ate the food Mari brought her in the front seat of a black car outside her apartment building, listening to Mari talk about growing up in Osaka and how she had ended up working for a man who terrified most people and had never once raised his voice at her in 6 years of employment. "He is not what people think," Mari said, unprompted, watching Naomi eat with the careful attention of someone assigned to notice details. "Everyone sees the suit and the men behind him and decides they know him. They do not."
"What is he then?" Naomi asked.
Mari considered the question longer than Naomi expected. "He is a man who lost the one person he could not protect," she said finally, and decided the rest of his life would be built around never letting that happen again. To anyone. Naomi did not ask who. She sensed correctly that this was not a story that belonged to Mari to tell. She learned it herself 2 weeks later, in the study with a closed door, on a night when Kimura had summoned her to discuss what his men had learned about Sato's next move, and instead found him standing at the window with a glass of something amber untouched in his hand, staring at nothing in particular. "There was a woman," he said, before Naomi had even finished crossing the room, as though the words had been sitting in his chest for years waiting for someone he trusted enough to release them to. "Her name was Ayako. We were engaged." Sato's father, before Sato inherited what he inherited, believed that killing her would break my will to continue building what my family had built. He was wrong about most things. He was not wrong about the breaking. "Ren," Naomi said, his first name feeling strange and heavy in her mouth, the first time she had used it. "I was 3 minutes away," he continued, as though she had not spoken. 3 minutes, and if I had left the meeting I was in when I first felt something was wrong instead of finishing it, she would still be alive. I have spent every year since making sure I am never 3 minutes away from anything that matters again." "That's why you moved when you heard that car door," Naomi said, understanding arriving all at once, a wave of comprehension for the speed with which he had pulled her off the wall outside Karate's, the total absence of hesitation in a moment where most people would have frozen. "You didn't think about it because you've spent years training yourself not to." "Yes," he said, finally turning from the window to look at her. "And I have never once regretted the discipline it required. Until 3 weeks ago, when I realized what it would cost me to lose it a second time." The air in the room went thin and charged, the way it does in the seconds before a storm breaks, and Naomi found she could not look away from him, from the rare, unguarded honesty on his face, from the way his hand had tightened almost imperceptibly around the glass he was not drinking from. "You don't know that you're going to lose anything," she said, though her voice was quieter than she intended. "I know that Sato has learned your name," he said. "I know that 2 nights ago, one of his men was seen outside the hospital where you work, asking questions about your schedule to a nurse who did not know better than to answer them. I know that I've spent 3 weeks telling myself that keeping you close was a security measure, and I have run out of ways to believe that lie." Naomi's pulse climbed, not from fear this time, though the news about Sato's man outside the hospital settled into her stomach like a stone, but from something else entirely, something that had been building in slow, deniable increments since the night he had pulled her into that alley and put his own body between her and a bullet. "What are you saying?" she asked. "I am saying that I have not been honest with either of us," he said, setting the glass down on the windowsill with careful precision, crossing the space between them until there was barely a foot of air separating them. I am saying that you are the first person in 3 years who has made me feel like something other than a weapon that happens to wear a suit, and I do not know what to do with that except tell you the truth and let you decide what you want from it. I don't scare easily, Naomi said, which was not quite an answer and not quite a deflection, but something honest caught between the two. I know, he said. I have watched you not scare for 3 weeks. It is one of several things about you I cannot seem to stop noticing. She should have stepped back. She understood, even as her feet remained rooted to the floor, that stepping into whatever this was meant stepping into a world with guns and territory wars and men who tracked nurses to their hospitals, a world entirely unlike the ordinary, exhausting, honest life she had built for herself, one 13-hour shift at a time. She stepped forward instead. His hand came up to her jaw, slow enough that she could have stopped him at any point and did not, and when he finally closed the distance between them, the kiss carried none of the coldness that strangers assumed defined him and all of the restraint of a man who had spent years denying himself exactly this kind of want. When they broke apart, his forehead rested against hers, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. "This does not make things safer," he said finally, quiet, almost rough. "I never asked for safer," Naomi said. "I asked for honest. You gave me that." The news about Sato's man outside the hospital proved to be the opening move in a war that escalated faster than either of them anticipated. 3 nights later, Mari called Naomi's phone at 11 at night, her voice tight in a way Naomi had never heard from her.
They took run, Mari said.
An hour ago, outside a meeting that was supposed to be neutral ground, Sato's men grabbed him in the parking structure before our people could react. Naomi's stomach dropped straight through the floor. "Where?" "We do not know yet. We are working on it." "Stay where you are. Someone will come get you." "No," Naomi said, and the word came out with more force than she expected, some part of her that had spent 13 years learning how to act under pressure refusing to sit still while a man she had come to care for more than she was ready to admit was somewhere in the city, being hurt or worse. "I'm not staying anywhere. Where is your team meeting?" "Naomi, this is not. I have watched people die from injuries they didn't have to die from because nobody knew what to do in the first 10 minutes, Naomi said. If your people find him hurt, you will need someone who knows how to keep him breathing until you can get him somewhere safe. Let me help." There was a pause on the line, and then Mari, against what was very likely explicit instructions from Kimura's own security protocols, gave her an address. The building Sato's men had taken Kimura to was a shuttered textile warehouse on the edge of the district, and by the time Naomi arrived with Mari and 4 of Kimura's men, the fight to get inside had already started, muzzle flashes lighting the loading dock in short, violent bursts. Naomi stayed low behind a concrete barrier as instructed, watching men she barely knew risk their lives for a boss who inspired the kind of loyalty that could not be bought, only earned. And when the gunfire finally quieted and Mari's voice came over the radio confirming the building was clear, Naomi was moving before anyone told her she could. She found Kimura in a back room, hands bound to a chair, a cut along his cheekbone and bruising darkening across his jaw, but alive, breathing, and the moment his eyes found her across the room, something in his controlled expression cracked entirely. "You should not be here," he said, voice rough, as Mari's men cut the bindings from his wrists. "You would have done the same for me," Naomi said, crouching in front of him, checking his pupils with the automatic precision of 13 years of training even as her hands were not entirely steady. "You did do the same for me. Outside the restaurant, remember." "That is different."
"It is not," she said.
"I am not something you protect from a distance, Ren. I am someone who stands beside you when it matters. If you cannot accept that, this ends here." He looked at her for a long moment, something raw and unguarded moving across his face, 3 weeks of careful denial finally giving way entirely. "I do not want it to end," he said. "I want you standing beside me for considerably longer than tonight." In the days after the warehouse, Naomi found herself learning the rhythms of a world she had never expected to belong to. She learned that Mari carried 2 phones, one for Kimura's legitimate businesses and one for everything else, and that she switched between them without ever losing her place in a conversation. She learned that the men who guarded the building did not sleep in shifts so much as they simply seemed to never sleep at all, and that they had started nodding to her in the hallway the way people nod to someone who has earned a place rather than been assigned one. She learned that Ren kept a single photograph in the drawer of his desk, turned face down, and that he had not shown it to her and she had not asked, understanding instinctively that some grief needed to be offered rather than demanded. She also learned that danger did not simply vanish because one warehouse had been cleared. 2 days after Sato's remaining lieutenants scattered, a car Naomi did not recognize idled outside the hospital for the better part of an hour, and when Mari ran the plates, they traced back to a shell company with old ties to Sato's network, dormant for years and suddenly active again. Kimura arrived at the hospital himself that evening, something he had never done before, standing at the edge of the parking lot in a coat that did nothing to disguise who he was to anyone paying attention. "You cannot keep showing up here," Naomi said, though she did not step away from him when he reached her. "People are going to talk."
"Let them talk," he said.
"I would rather every nurse on this floor know exactly who is waiting for you than leave you standing outside alone again. That's not the point, Ren. You have a war to run. You do not have time to be idling in a parking lot because you're worried about a car that was probably just some drunk businessman's driver." "It was not," he said, quiet enough that only she could hear. "The car belonged to a man named Ishida, one of the last of Sato's people still willing to make noise. I do not intend to let him make noise near you." The seriousness in his voice settled something cold into her chest, a reminder that the war, however contained, was not finished, and that being close to him meant being close to whatever came looking for him next. She thought of Ayako, the woman whose photograph he kept face down in a drawer, and understood for the first time the full weight of what he was afraid of losing twice. "I'm not going to spend my life hiding because someone might come looking for me," she said finally. "I didn't hide from the exhaustion of 13-hour shifts, and I'm not going to hide from this either. But you have to let me help you fight it instead of just protecting me from it." He studied her for a long moment under the parking lot lights, something shifting behind his eyes, some old instinct toward isolation losing ground against the plain fact of her standing in front of him, unafraid and unwilling to be managed. "Ishida will not stop on his own," he said finally. "He believes finishing what Sato started will earn him standing with whatever remains of that organization. I intend to make sure he understands how wrong that belief is. Then let me know what you're planning instead of just disappearing for 2 days and leaving Mari to explain it to me." It was, she would think later, the moment their partnership became something more deliberate than survival, an agreement that whatever came next, they would face it with full information rather than one of them shielding the other out of a habit built on old loss. 3 nights later, when Kimura's people located Ishida in a shipping office near the harbor, Naomi was not left waiting in a safe house wondering. She sat with Mari in a car 3 blocks away, listening to the radio traffic, ready to move the moment she was needed, and when word came back that Ishida had been taken into custody by Kimura's people without a shot fired, the relief that moved through her was sharper and more complete than anything she had felt hiding from danger ever could have been. Sato's remaining forces scattered within the week, the loss of his warehouse and the men captured inside it proving fatal to whatever momentum his campaign against Kimura's territory had built. The war did not end cleanly, not the way wars rarely do, but the immediate danger receded enough that Naomi found herself, 3 weeks later, standing on the balcony of an apartment that was no longer a safe house but simply Ren's home, watching the city lights spread out below in a view she still had not gotten used to. "You could have died in that warehouse," she said, when he came to stand beside her, the ink at his wrist visible beneath his rolled sleeve, his guard down in a way she had learned was reserved entirely for her. "I could have," he agreed. "I have made peace with that possibility a long time ago. What I had not made peace with was the possibility of you walking into danger to reach me." "Get used to it," Naomi said. "I'm not going anywhere." He studied her for a long moment, the city light catching the edge of his jaw, the scar at his cheekbones still healing, and something in his expression settled into a certainty that had nothing tentative left in it. "I did not think I would want this again," he said. "A life with someone in it who mattered enough to lose. I built everything around never wanting it again. And now, And now I cannot imagine the alternative, he said, and reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers with the same deliberate care he brought to everything, and Naomi understood, standing on that balcony with the whole dangerous, complicated city spread out beneath them, that she had not been rescued from her old life so much as she had chosen, with open eyes, to build a new one. She still worked the same floor at the same hospital, still came home some nights with her scrubs stained and her feet aching, still gave everything she had to strangers who would never know her name. But now there was a car outside when her shift ended, and a man inside it who no longer needed to explain why he had stopped for her that first night outside a restaurant she could not afford, because she already knew. He had recognized someone who had spent a lifetime keeping other people alive, and decided that for once, someone should do the same for her. If this story kept you up past your bedtime, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one. Drop a comment below and tell us where you were when Rin pulled Naomi into that alley, and let us know which city we should send our next dangerous, devoted boss to find his match in. New stories drop every week, so stay close, because the next one might just wreck you even harder than this one did.